Okay, so where we left off was with Scott Weekly in chapter 18. Scott Weekly was an arms dealer in San Diego. He worked and was exposed by Ron Lister, who also was an arms dealer. Ron Lister kept saying when he was questioned by the local police that he was working for the CIA. So that's kind of where we left off on chapter 18. So, chapter 19. It didn't take the FBI very long to figure out who Scott Weekly was. Weekly had been something of an inadvertent celebrity back in 1983. Readily available was a story in the Los Angeles Times that gave him a nickname called Dr. Death. Scott's kind of a tough little guy, said Ron Lister's longtime attorney, Lynn Ball. Quote, he got busted out of the Naval Academy and entered the service as an enlisted man, which basically means he got. So when you go to the academy, you have to sign an agreement. You do the same thing with ROTC, that if they're paying for your education, you owe them an enlistment if for any reason you're disqualified from the service. We had somebody in a ROTC detachment down the road that ran off and got married to a foreigner. And when she came back to visit her family, she was arrested at the port of entry and enlisted into the military. So they're very strict about that, just FYI. So that's what they're talking about here. He went on to become, once he was forced to enlist, to become a Navy SEAL. Then, after he got out, he had some friends in Virginia. Essentially, Scott was involved in the same kind of bullshit that Ron was, providing, quote unquote, providing security, i.e., the CIA. A federal public defender told a judge in 1987 that Weekly was, quote, some sort of a combination between John Wayne and Rambo and Oliver North, perhaps, and even James Bond. He does have an involvement, a lengthy involvement, in some rather mysterious activities, unquote. Weekly had been a classmate at Annapolis of Oliver North. Now, what's really interesting about that, there's a book called The Nightingale Song, and it talks about how all five people that were involved in Iran-Contra, John McCain, Poindexter, North, a guy, Webb, and another guy that went on to be a congressman from Virginia, whose name I can't remember right now, but all five of them were classmates at the Naval Academy. So I want you to understand this is a big picture here of people that all coalesce around the Iran-Contra. That was, he would have been the Naval Academy of the class of 68 because of the buildup of the large number of demerits. Demerits. That's how he got kicked out. He joined the SEALs, the Navy's most elite band of fighters, and became a demolition and weapons expert, thus earning him a a living when he got out. He was awarded 2 Bronze Stars in Vietnam, where, according to his lawyer, he was involved in extensive combat duty and numerous intelligence operations. He later married the daughter of an admiral. The U.S. Customs agent told federal investigators that Weekly's stint with the Navy SEALs gave him, quote unquote, contacts in the intelligence community, including the CIA and NSA, unquote. In 1983, he and several other Americans were arrested in a small village on the border of Laos. while on a covert mission to gather intelligence on American soldiers missing from Vietnam War. The head of the DIA had wanted to find out once and for all if the rumors were true. And of course, that's the mission that the entire series of Rambo is modeled off of. Leading the expedition was former Army Green Beret Lieutenant Colonel James Bo Gritz, a decorated Vietnam hero and former commander of U.S. Special Forces in the Panama Canal. And of course, what's very interesting about that is that's where the School of Americas was, and that's the timing that the School of Americas was full operational in the Panama Canal Zone, and it was the manual that later become public information about how to torture, kidnap, and assassinate people was being taught at the School of Americas, and that puts this guy right there. Though he retired from the military in 1979, Gritz said that for several years afterwards, he worked with Army intelligence, known as Intelligence Support Activity, ISA, trying to locate American POWs in Southeast Asia. According to author Stephen Emerson, the ISA, known in military intelligence circle as the Activity, provided Gritz with tens of thousands of dollars worth of cameras, polygraph equipment to check the veracity of people in the theater, radio communication systems, and plane tickets to Bangkok, Thailand. Gritz was also given satellite photos and other intelligence data. The operation was codenamed Grand Eagle. Dr. Death, Weekly, was Gritz's right-hand man. In congressional testimony, Gritz said that Grand Eagle was officially shelved after a bureaucratic dispute between the Activity and DIA. Deputy Director of DIA, Admiral Alan Paulson, confirmed to Congress that a Department of Defense organization proposed an operation using Mr. Gritz as in a collection capacity. But Paulson said the operation was turned down at the first level of approval. The official rejection didn't end the mission, however. With the ISA's equipment and money at their disposal, Gritz and Weekly proceeded under the ironic code name Operation Lazarus. Weekly's contributions, according to a 1983 Soldier of Fortune magazine story, included having silencers altered to fit a 9mm submachine gun to be used by the team. The first mission in November of 1982 resulted in a firefight with Laotian forces, and one member of Gritz's team was killed. As he prepared to make another stab at infiltrating Laos in early 1983, word of his mission was leaked to Soldier of Fortune magazine and picked up by the Los Angeles Times and Boston Globe. Exposed, Gritz and his squad were arrested by Thai police at the edge of the Mekong River and charged with possession of illegal equipment. Gritz, Weekly, and an anti-terrorism expert and the daughter of a missing U.S. pilot were jailed and held for trial. In a letter to the LA Times, Gritz said that the CIA and DIA both knew of the mission and provided him with the gear. Both agencies disavowed any knowledge of the mission, but the denials were difficult to believe. Quote, U.S. sources in Bangkok said the radio was the latest in U.S. spy gear with powerful transmitters that had been used to send messages from Laos directly to Washington, unquote. UPI reported the disclosure of the radio type and purpose bolstered the credibility of Gritz's statement, and that his first mission into Laos last November and his apparently just completed second mission was carried out with the blessing of U.S. intelligence. UPI's perceptiveness was short-lived. Those telling paragraphs were cut from a UPI story that moved later that afternoon, and from then on, most press reports uncritically accepted the government's denial of Grits and Weekly and were dismissed as commandos off on their own private mission. A year later, however, syndicated columnist Jack Anderson reported that Grit's team had been sent into Southeast Asia, quote, with at least initial support from the CIA and the Pentagon, unquote. Anderson based the conclusion on confidential court records filed in a federal fraud case in Honolulu, Hawaii, involving a polo playing investment banker named Ronald Ray Regauld, who was accused of stealing millions from his bankrupt company's clients. Renauld claimed his investment company had been a conduit for CIA to secretly funnel money to covert operations around the world, and that the agency had suddenly yanked its accounts and therefore his company had collapsed. The CIA admitted to Congress that Renauld's company had some ties to the CIA, which is very unusual, and that several CIA officials had investments at his bank. Anderson put it more bluntly. Renauld's investment firm was hip deep in active or retired CIA employees. In other words, a money laundering place. In an affidavit, Renauld said the CIA, quote, had originally committed its support to Grits' mission and that Renauld did supply a few $1,000s to support the mission at the CIA's bequest, unquote. According to Anderson, the bombshell of Renauld's exhibits is a confidential letter to Grits on official DIA stationery, instructing Grits to pull together evidence to convince political skeptics that the POWs exist. As an aside, Renauld also told Anderson that he was approached in 1982 by a senior CIA official and asked if he would help in a CIA drug smuggling operation. When Renauld told the CIA official that he had no one in his firm with experience in drug operations, the CIA man contradicted him and named a Renauld employee who had been a longtime CIA contract agent in Southeast Asia, which would surprise no one because that entire operation was drug smuggling. The CIA disputed Anderson's column, but the columnist never backed down. Renauld was convicted of fraud and sentenced to an astonishing 80 years in federal prison. When a police investigator asked Scott Weekly in 1996 about his relationship with the CIA, Weekly replied that it really didn't matter what answer he gave. There is no way the police could ever confirm anything that I say, he said. Quote, he also agreed that if he was CIA, he wouldn't tell anyone anyway, unquote. In 1998, the CIA Inspector General reported it could find no evidence that Weekly had any relationship with the CIA. Another officer tried to check out Weekly's military background by calling the Office of Veteran Affairs in Los Angeles. According to his report, an odd thing happened. Scott Weekly's name was found in the database. The person on the phone calmly read Weekly's name to me and suddenly exclaimed, "Whoa!" He quickly informed me that due to provisions of the Privacy Act, only the fact that he was a veteran could be confirmed. No information about the length of service, branch, or MOS, which is what his job would have been, could be released without a subpoena or the consent of Weekly, which is very unusual, meaning they were hiding his records. Notwithstanding what Lister's claim to the LA Majors drug investigation that, quote, Mr. Weekly knows what I'm doing, unquote, it is difficult to say with certainty if Weekly knew of Lister's cocaine dealings with Daniello Blanton. Weekly denies it, but there is no doubt that between 1982 and 1986, Scott Weekly was helping out on the flip side of Blanton's criminal enterprise, the sale of exotic weapons and communication gear, some of which was being sold to Freeway Ricky and his fellow crack dealers in South Central Los Angeles. A U.S. Customs agent, John Kellogg, testified in 1988 that he believed Weekly was an arms merchant who was involved in international munitions deals. And how did you come to that belief? He was asked. Kellogg was asked by a federal judge that exact question. Though his various contacts with me and his foreign travels, Kellogg said, he would come by after several months' absence and come into my office and say, I believe you need to know about this, and then detail every specific information concerning munition dealers and that were under investigation by uh, the customs agency. According to interviews Weekly did with the ATF agents in 1987, he admitted that he had been involved with the Contras in the past. A U.S. Customs official told the ATF that Weekly was acting at the directions of Customs when he was involved with the Contras, which kind of matches the information that we've already discovered. Let me bring SR up here in case they kick me out again. Lister confirmed that he, quote, often met with Scott Weekly because Weekly was very knowledgeable in the area of commercially available military-related systems, unquote. He said Weekly was a dependable source of information as to which systems were declassified and able to sell legally. In the final weeks of 1986, less than a month after Lister identified Mr. Weekly to the sheriff's department as his CIA contact, evidence surfaced suggesting that Lister's description wasn't far off the mark. At the time Lister made that claim, Scott Weekly was participating in at least 2 covert operations involving the National Security Council and a special unit inside the U.S. State Department that was working closely with Oliver North and the CIA. Both Weekly and Gritz have testified that in early 1986, they were asked to conduct training exercises for another of the CIA's secret armies, the anti-communist, think Gladio, Afghan resistance movement, the Mujahideen. The Mujahideen was basically the CIA's version of the Gladio operators in Afghanistan that gave birth to Al Qaeda and ISIS. That's where you get that information from. Before undertaking that mission, they said, they sought to obtain an approval of 2 State Department officials in Washington. William R. Bode, who at the time was a special assistant to the Undersecretary of State for Security Assistance, and Bode's aide, Army Colonel Nestor Pino Marina. Eugene Wheatley, a former Air Force security expert who knows both of those men personally, believes Bode and Pino were CIA agents working under the State Department cover on the Contra project with Oliver North. That office was CIA through and through, he said. Wheaton, whose name shows up repeatedly in Bode's daily agenda and Oliver North's notes during the 1985 and 86. There is some independent evidence to suggest Wheaton's conclusions. In an interview with Iran-Contra investigators, former CIA Central American Task Force Chief Alan Fires admitted that he and North in late 1985 discussed an unnamed paramilitary covert action program involving Pino and Bode. You spell his name Bode. And a company called Falcon Wings Incorporated. What that program involved is not known. The rest of Fire's interview was censored because of quote unquote national security. Undersecretary of State William Snyder told the FBI in 1988 that Bode and Pino were responsible for Central America and their jobs involved keeping in touch with the Department of Defense and other government agencies to determine what U.S. assistance programs would work. One of those programs appeared to have been the secret Contra maritime operations that North and CIA Station Chief Joseph Fernandez were running in Costa Rica involving the shrimp boats. Using Kevlar speedboats and offshore shrimp trawlers as motherships. As discussed in earlier chapters, those missions were being spearheaded by two CIA linked drug traffickers working with the Southern Front Contras. Bay of Pigs veterans Felipe Vidal, Vidal, and Dagoberto Nunez. In an interview with Iran Contra prosecutor Lawrence Welch's office, Pino confirmed that he and Bode met with North to discuss the purchase of the speedboats. During that meeting, Pino said, North unexpectedly announced that he could wind up behind bars. North did refer to going to jail, Pino confirmed, but he said his impression was that the phrase was common usage in the military before an inspection. I've had a lot of inspections in the military. I've never, ever said I was going to jail. Just saying. Colonel Pena, another Bay of Pigs veteran, has a long history of involvement with the CIA in covert operations while wearing a uniform. In 1982, he became the U.S. Army Action Officer on the Civil War in El Salvador, where we were training the death squads and then pretended they were a political party. Pena was a close friend of former CIA agent, the star of our show, Felix Rodriguez, who was overseeing North's Contra resupply operation at Ilopango Air Base in El Salvador at the time. Felix Rodriguez, in fact, says he first met Oliver North through Bode and Pena. Like Rodriguez, Pena was close to the Salvadoran Air Force General Rafael Bustillo, the guy who ran Ilopango Air Base. Pino referred to Bustillo as family, and the Salvadoran general sometimes stayed at Pino's house in Virginia when he was visiting, family. As for Bode, he was described by his boss, Undersecretary Snyder, as a deployable asset who was used on non-routine projects, basically meaning ones that were being ran out of the State Department as opposed to the CIA. Bode's desk calendar, obtained from the National Archives, show frequent meetings from 1985 and 86 with North and CIA operative Robert Owens, the guy that was pretending to work in the State Department. North's liaison to the Contras and Cuban mercenaries working on the Southern Front. So in other words, he was one of the key coordinators for the entire Contra operation. Grits testified that he approached Bode and Pena to discuss the Afghan training program he and Weekly were asked to conduct because, quote, I've worked for intelligence agencies and I wanted to make sure that we weren't doing something that was illegal. Mr. Bode was enthusiastic, as a matter of fact. I would call him excited. He said that not only did he approve the proposal, but that he would provide other Afghan groups, since there was a division of about 6 or 7 subgroups, that he would provide other people for us to train also. Later, in further meetings, I did provide him with a detailed training proposal. Initially, I gave him an outline for the training proposal to be 76 days, Grit said. Bode said that had to be shortened to 30 days, quote, and eliminated some of the classes that he felt were too sensitive for the Mujahideen at the time. It included various secure communication courses that we planned to give, unquote. In 1987 interview, Bode confirmed that he had met with Grits about the training program and, quote, gave him the names of 1 or 2 people to talk to, unquote. He denied that he authorized the operation. He went on to say, just the fact that we met and had talks didn't authorize anything. The Afghan program is a covert program, okay? All CIA, or perhaps a little bit of Department of Defense, The State Department does not get involved in those things, unquote, which is a bold-faced lie. As anyone who has studied the CIA can attest, the State Department has provided cover for more CIA operations over the years than any other government entity, except maybe the military. Bode's assistant, Nestor Pino, also denied that he had officially authorized the missions, but he said, quote, convinced that the efforts taken by Colonel Gritz to train Afghan freedom fighters that turned into terrorists, like they all do, are in concert with and complementary of U.S. policy for Afghanistan, and that Colonel Gritz and Mr. Weekly saw it that way too, unquote. Their activities, Pino declared, were inspired by a strong desire to support the Afghan resistance against the Soviet occupation, and by even stronger desire to advance the interest of the United States. You know, the beacon of freedom. In federal court, Weekly and Gritz testified that the money to pay the Afghan training courses came from Stanford Technology, one of the companies fronting for Oliver North's enterprise, the quasi-government arms dealership at the heart of the Iran-Contra scandal. Stanford Technology was used by North and his agents to launder the profits of the Iranian missile cell. During the Iran-Contra deposition at Stanford Technology's owner, Albert Hakim, Hakim, admitted that approximately $1 million from his various front companies were paid out for miscellaneous projects at the request of Lieutenant Colonel North. In late 1986, Gritz and Weekly's training program, conducted in the Nevada desert on land owned by the federal government, was accidentally exposed by a law student in Oklahoma City who was married to a policeman. She was sitting in her apartment one night when Weekly and this cop showed up with about 200 rounds of C4 explosives, recalled a federal prosecutor by the name of Stephen Koratash, who handled the case. They were looking to store it somewhere. She happened to mention it to her father and dad, and her dad called the ATF. The ATF learned that Weekly had loaded the C4 aboard 2 commercial flights to Las Vegas and then left the country. So they're putting explosives on commercial airlines. The ATF report on Weekly's investigation, found in the CIA's files during an internal probe in 1997, indicated that Weekly claimed he had done this for the CIA. Now, what's even more interesting to me is, like the Tibet program, like the Cuban exile program, i.e. a pattern, they are bringing people they are training to be basically mercenaries from Afghanistan into the United States and training them in Nevada. That's what I just said. No one here would find that unusual because we've established that pattern already. The ATF agents initially suspected that Weekly might be a terrorist until they got a look at his long-distance telephone records for September and October of 1986. Among other things, they found calls to Colonel Pino at the State Department, to William Logan, Southwest Regional Director of the U.S. Customs Service, to the National Security Council, and to a defense contractor by the name of United Technologies. The agents broke the news to federal prosecutor Koratash, who was not pleased. The storm over the Iran-Contra scandal was then reaching a crescendo, and the last thing Koratash wanted was to be dragged into that fiasco. Quote, my first thought was, oh great, here I am picking my nose in Oklahoma, and now I've stumbled onto the Contra deal. That's what I thought this was, and I can remember thinking, how the hell did I get a hold of a case like this, unquote. Just your lucky day. No stranger to the workings of the government, Koratash bounced Weekly's investigation up the bureaucratic ladder, and it kept right on bouncing, all the way to the top of the criminal division of the U.S. Justice Department in Washington. Records show that on December 2nd, 1986, Assistant U.S. Attorney General William Weld, W E L D, was briefed on the case. According to Weld's notes of the briefing, Weekly was somehow connected to the U.S. State Department and had made long distance phone calls to a Lieutenant Colonel Tom Harvey, who was on the staff of the National Security Council. Gritz has said Harvey was supervising the POW hunt that he and Weekly had went on and provided them with White House and NSC credentials. Harvey later denied that, but someone did. Koratash supervisor, Oklahoma City U.S. Attorney William Price, asked Weld if he should proceed with the case. Weld told him to go ahead and then asked one of his aides, Deputy Assistant Attorney General Mark Richard, to look into the case. Richard already had some background in this area. Earlier that year, he had been given an award by the CIA for protecting national security, which means he's a cover-up artist. Just, that's the short Reader's Digest version. A CIA spokesman said Richard was honored for his outstanding work in the case against Ronald Renault. You know, the guy that was the CIA banker until they threw him in jail for the rest of his life. Yeah, that guy was in charge of that case, covering up the CIA's ass. It never stops. Okay. Thanks to Richard's efforts, Renault's ties to the CIA was never permitted to be made public. He's a cover-up artist called a justice official. Richard called U.S. Attorney Bill Price on December 11th, 1986, and was briefed on the investigation. Several months later, Richard was grilled about that briefing in a deposition in the Iran-Contra Committee. According to the transcripts of that deposition, Knowlton confronted, that's the attorney asking the questions, confronted Richard with 2 sheets of lined paper filled with handwritten notes. Just tell me what this is, Knowlton asked. Is that your handwriting, first of all? Richard said, I plead guilty. That's my handwriting. This is the gist of the conversation I had with Mr. Price in his briefing of me regarding the individual who had been arrested in his possible involvement in some CIA Contra-related activities. Knowlton went on to ask, now, about a third of the way down, individuals' names was Weekly. Is that what I'm reading correct? Weekly. Yes, was the response. About a third of the way down, it says, if I'm reading it correctly, Weekly post on tape that he tied into the CIA and Hassenfuss. Said he reports to people reporting to Bush. What does that mean? This is his response. I don't know what that post means, but apparently there was a tape recording. This is a matter which had just arisen in the U.S. Attorney's Office. I was getting briefed. It's an individual who had been arrested and is asserting, or there is a suggestion of a relationship to the CIA and Hassenfuss. And for those of you who haven't listened to the earlier versions, Hassenfuss was the sole survivor of the CIA aircraft shot down over Nicaragua, and the exportation of explosives to the countries. At the time of Richard's conversation with Bill Price, Weekly was actually about 2 weeks away from being arrested. He was still in Burma with Bo Gritz on their latest POW hunt. Price was apparently briefing Richard on the tapes of intercontinental telephone conversations Weekly was having with police officers in Oklahoma City, who made tapes, and that's how the Justice Department obtained them. And he's alleging The attorney goes on, and he's alleging or indicating to someone that he's connected with the CIA and that he is reporting to people who report to Bush. That's what he's asserting, Richard agreed. What is the current status, if you know? I cannot, as far as I recall. It was referred to blah, blah, blah. And then he kind of mumbles. Referred to the independent counsel? The attorney asked. To the intelligence community, Richard confirmed. And I just don't know the status. Well, the reason he didn't know is because the case had been turned over to Lawrence Walsh. The Iran-Contra committee didn't pursue Weekly at all. Knowlton, the attorney, said, unfortunately, neither did Walsh because Walsh had nothing but the sketchiest details about the Weekly case. The tapes on which Weekly discusses the CIA, Hassenfuss, and George Bush did not appear to have been turned over, nor were Weekly's phone records made available to Walsh's office, which again is obstruction of justice. While no evidence has surfaced suggesting the State Department officials Bode and Pena knew of Blanton's criminal enterprise, records show that they were not new on the subject of the Contras and the cocaine. At the same time they were dealing with Scott Weekly, the two men were trying desperately to get another CIA-linked cocaine trafficker out of prison because of his past assistance to the Contras. The federal prisoner, Jose Bueso Rosa, had been indicted in 1984 for his part in a bizarre scheme to assassinate the president of Honduras, Roberto Suarzo Cordova, and stage a coup using the proceeds of cocaine sales to finance it. Gosh, where have I heard that before? President Suazo had drawn Bueso Rosa's wrath by dumping Honduran Army Chief General Gustavo Alvarez, a fanatical anti-communist who was one of the fathers and chief supporters of the Contras. Bueso Rosa, a Honduran general, had been one of Alvarez's top aides, and the cocaine coup was intended to restore Alvarez and his men to power. Unfortunately for the plotters, the two American military officers they hired to murder the current president went to the FBI. In late October 1984, a collection of Cubans, our Gladio guys, and Honduran arms merchants was arrested at a remote island airstrip in Florida with 764 pounds of cocaine valued at about $10 million wholesale and $40 million retail. The announcements at the time of the arrest made the Department of State and Justice quite properly categorize this case as a triumph for the war on drugs, said former state official. But not everyone in the Reagan administration was happy about it at all. Because they weren't really interested in a war on drugs. They were interested in getting the drugs into the United States to use the proceeds to supply the Contras. In the summer of 1986, the Honduran attorney flew to Washington and met with Colonel Pena, who began a vigorous lobbying campaign at State and Justice to turn Bueso Rosa loose, even though he had been indicted for racketeering, conspiracy, and attempted murder for hire. The colonel asserted an American intelligence interest in the case. As Pino explained to the Iran-Contra investigators, General Bueso Rosa had information which he could use against us, as he had been privy to a large amount of very specific CIA information. They didn't want him talking. To get Washington's attention, Bueso Rosa's attorney subpoenaed Oliver North, CIA officer Dwayne Dewey Claridge, former U.S. ambassador to Honduras John Negroponte, and former U.S. Army General Paul Gorman to testify at the Honduran racketeering trial as defense witnesses because he wants them to admit he was working for the CIA. In several computer messages to NSC Chief John Poindexter, and again, John Poindexter is in the Naval Academy at the same time Oliver North is, the same time Weekly was before he got kicked out. In September 1986, North fretted that the case would become a major headache for the administration. Quote, the problem with the Boceso case is that he was the man whom Negroponte, Gorman, Claridge, and I worked out arrangements with, and then there's a redaction. North wrote, quote, only Gorman, Claridge, and I were fully aware of all that he was doing on our behalf, unquote. North's computer messages about Rosa was revealing for another reason. They illustrated just how skewed the Reagan administration's sense of justice was when it was regarding the war on drugs. At the same time, Reagan and Bush were whipping the American public into a frenzy over street corner crack dealers. North and top administration officials were livid that Rosa had been charged with a crime. Quote, justice is justifiably upset that none of this information was made available to them prior to the indictment or before going to trial, unquote. That's what North said. Quote, Claridge was totally unaware that CIA had responded to a justice query on the case with the terse comment that they had no interest in the case, unquote. So in other words, they're actually implying that had they been told, the right people been told, they would have not prosecuted the guy. They would have made sure he didn't get prosecuted. North's pissed off that they dropped the ball on saying he's an asset so he doesn't get prosecuted or even charged, while at the same time another part of the Reagan administration is lauding the fact that they busted a drug dealer. You can't make this shit up. The general later agreed to drop the subpoena and pled guilty with the understanding that he would be sentenced to a minimum security facility at Eglin Air Force Base. North wrote, quote, for a short period, days or weeks, and then walk free, unquote. How's that for justice? The Justice Department official, Mark Richard, who met with North to discuss the case, said he was told that Rosa was going to go in one entrance and out the other, out the rear. An all-star collection of U.S. government officials, including Colonel Nestor Pino, Bill Brode, and the former head of DIA, appeared as character witness for Rosa, the drug dealer and would-be assassin, urging the judge to go easy on the admitted racketeer. But since Rosa's co-conspirators had been hit with sentences of up to 30 years, it was impossible to let the ringleader off. He was given a 5-year sentence and assigned to a federal prison in Tallahassee, a much harsher environment, not the country club he had been promised. In North's view, that only made things worse. Quote, our major concern, Gorman, North, Claridge, is that when Rosa finds out what's happening to him, he will break his long-standing silence about Nicaraguan resistance and other sensitive operations, unquote. That's what North wrote to Poindexter. Quote, Gorman, North, Claridge, Revel, a CIA official, Stephen Trott, and Elliot Abrams will cabal quietly in the morning to look at options, pardon, clemency, deportation, reduced sentence. Objective is to keep him from feeling like he's been lied to in the legal process and start spilling the beans. Will advise, unquote. The next day, North told Poindexter there had been a good meeting this morning with all concerned. Good for who? The Justice Department had graciously agreed to transfer Rosa to Eglin. work out a deal to reduce his sentence, and buttonhole the federal judge to explain our equities in the matter. Revel and Trott both believe this will result in the approval of a petition for probationary release and deportation to Honduras. Discreetly briefing Rosa and his attorney on the whole process should alleviate concerns that Rosa will start singing what no one wants to hear. That's what North said. The bottom line, all now seems headed in the right direction, North wrote. But Colonel Pena and the DIA got a little too happy. A few days before Rosa was to report to prison, State Department official McNeil got a call from an upset Justice Department official informing him that DIA had scheduled a luncheon honoring the would-be assassin at the Pentagon's executive dining room. The executive dining room is the dining room for the generals. They're going to have a party for the guy they hired to kill the president of Honduras. And that's before he's even been released from jail. The ceremony was canceled, but McNeil said he was warned by a superior that he was looking for trouble if he kept sticking his nose in the Rosa affair. It was very nasty business. McNeil had been, at the beginning of the story, McNeil was the Costa Rica ambassador. You know, the guy that oversaw the drug trafficking and shrimp boat operation, that same guy. He told Congress he suspected something sinister was behind the frantic machinations of North and company to get the Honduran out of jail and out of the U.S. Quote, I must tell you, this is circumstantial, but it seems to me that the circumstantial evidence is such that one has to wonder if there's not a narcotics angle, McNeil would later testify. Of course, he knew there was. What was so embarrassing that at least 8 senior officers of the U.S. government would think it necessary to get this man off. In a deposition, Justice Department official Steve Trott claimed he didn't know why he went through such contortions for Rosa, other than that North had told him about the possible release of sensitive information. You know, plausible deniability. I don't know why I was getting the drug trafficker would-be assassin off. I just did what I was told. And what information was the national security information? Quote, I never got into the substance of what it was, Trott said. Whatever it was, Rosa held his tongue, and after doing 3 years at Eglin, he was slipped back to Honduras. In a 1995 interview with the Baltimore Sun, he gave a chilling insight into the kind of secrets he possessed. He disclosed that the CIA had equipped and trained Honduran Army official death squads, the 316 Battalion, which was blamed for torture, disappearance, and murders of hundreds of Hondurans in the 1980s. Gosh, where does that sound familiar? In every single Latin American country. According to court records, similar promises of leniencies were made to Scott Weekly to keep him quiet about his involvement with Bode Pino and the quote-unquote enterprise. As with Rosa's case, the efforts look particularly unseemly, given the fact that at the time they were undertaken, Weekly was under federal investigation in connection with Danielle Blanton's cocaine ring, something that had been known at the highest levels of the CIA, Justice Department, and DIA. On December 21st, 1986, just 2 days after independent counsel Lawrence Walsh was appointed to investigate the Iran-Contra, Weekly got a call at his home in San Diego and was asked to meet with federal agents at a room at a downtown Holiday Inn. Weekly had just returned from his latest POW hunt with Bo Gritz, allegedly on behalf of the National Security Council, but he discovered that the agents, accompanied by Oklahoma City federal prosecutor Steve Koratash, didn't want to discuss that mission. They wanted to know about the C4 he had placed on airliners before he departed. When Weekly explained the C4 had been safely detonated in the Nevada desert, he said the prosecutors offered him a deal. If he kept quiet and pled guilty to illegally transporting the C4 to Las Vegas, he would be released on unsupervised probation and the case would be closed. One of the points specifically that we agreed on was that this investigation would start and stop with me and that it would not affect any others that were involved. Weekly later testified to that point. Prosecutor Koratash denies everything. The next morning, Weekly and Koratash flew to Oklahoma City, where the prosecutor began hurriedly telling me all the answers that I was to give to the officials and emphatically told me if things got out of hand, he would answer for me. That's what Weekly's story was. Weekly went before a federal judge that afternoon and without ever having to speak a word, tersely pleaded guilty to interstate transportation of explosives. Under Koratash's gentle questioning, he admitted to shipping plastic explosives on 2 commercial airliners to Las Vegas, but was never asked why. Koratash helpfully pointed out that the passengers were never in danger and asked Weekly to be released from custody without having to post bail. Federal Judge Ralph Thompson said it was not routine that people be released on bail in this kind of case. But he did it anyway. The hearing was over in a matter of minutes, and Weekly was soon on his way back home. Then Bo Gritz began shouting his mouth off about the CIA and drugs. Following his last POW foray, the super patriot had come home radicalized. He and Weekly had trekked into the mountains of northern Burma to visit opium warlord named Kun Sa, who commanded a tribal army estimated at about 40,000 men. Gritz has said that their primary mission from Colonel Harvey at the NSC was to check out a tip Vice President Bush had received, suggesting that the warlord knew something about missing American servicemen. As with Gritz's earlier mission, the U.S. government denies any involvement. However, no one has explained why Gritz and Weekly were meeting and speaking with National Security Council officials, which was well documented. After a 3-day hike into the jungle, Gritz said they found Kun Sa and discovered he knew nothing about American POWs. In other words, Bush Sr. set him up. What he did know about, Gritz claimed, was a CIA-run heroin trafficking network that had been operating in the region for more than a decade. Way more than a decade, because we know all about that. Gritz said that Kun Sa, who controlled much of the raw opium trade in the Golden Triangle, opened up his ledger book and provided him the names of CIA officials involved and dates of their meetings with him. Gritz and Weekly returned to the U.S. by mid-December 1986 with videotapes of their talks about the opium. And Gritz said he immediately turned them over to Colonel Harvey at the NSC. Gritz said Harvey told him to erase and forget what he had learned from the opium traffickers because the information would hurt the government. Instead, Gritz put on his medals and his fatigues and went public, charging the U.S. officials for dealing in heroin that the Reagan administration was trying to cover up. So now we've got Contra and heroin going on, all of which is true. He pointed to Scott Weekly's recent arrest and conviction on explosive charges as proof of a high-level conspiracy to silence and discredit them because of their awkward discoveries. While the national press largely ignored Gritz, as they always do when somebody's telling the truth, it received some wire service and radio coverage, particularly in Oklahoma City. Weekly's prosecutor, Steve Koratash, was driving to the supermarket when he heard Gritz come over the radio claiming that I was retaliating against Scott Weekly because of some information Gritz had gotten from Kun Sa. I didn't know who the F Kun Sa was. I didn't have a clue. He thought Gritz was an idiot. but others didn't find him so unbelievable. A month later, federal agents raided his home in Sandy Valley, Nevada, hauling away boxes of paperwork. Simultaneously, Weekly began receiving pressure from prosecutors to implicate Grits in illegal transportation of the C4 as well. Weekly refused to cooperate, urging that he had made the deal not to finger anyone. That was their deal, not his. Weekly was protecting the hell out of Bo Grits. When Weekly's sentencing on the explosive case rolled around in April 1987, Coratosh filed a confidential memorandum with the court saying Weekly had refused to take a polygraph test and failed to cooperate with the government. A letter from the U.S. Customs commending Weekly for his help in other investigations was withdrawn at the last minute. Judge Wayne Allen told Weekly that it appeared that he was simply trying to protect the names of others. That's your privilege, but it comes at a cost. Weekly was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison, requiring him to serve a year before he could be eligible for parole, and fined him $2,000. Weekly's response was, "I got my brains effed out." A month later, in May of 1987, Grits was indicted by a federal grand jury in Nevada for misusing a passport during his travels to Southeast Asia because, of course, he was given a fake passport. He admitted that he used a phony passport, but he said it was given to him by the U.S. government, pointing out that Oliver North had committed the same crime during his overseas travels and had never been indicted for it. Grits also told the UPI that the charges were intended to silence him and his accusations about the CIA and Defense Department being involved in opium trafficking. Grits and his attorney vowed to turn his trial into an expose on government drug dealing, but things never got that far. The charges were dismissed by a federal judge right before the trial. After spending 14 months in prison, Scott Weekly was ordered released after a hearing revealed that he had indeed been working for the U.S. government at the time of his offenses and had also been working as a U.S. Customs informant for many years, none of which was told in his trial. He was placed on probation with an unusual caveat that he report any future contact with any officer or employee of the Department of State or Department of Defense or CIA or any other intelligence agency in the United States. While the Justice Department pounced on Grits and Weekly for what seemed to be trivial violations of federal law, it showed no zeal at all in pursuing Danielle Blanton, who was the primary supplier of all cocaine going into South Central LA. That investigation involved massive amounts of cocaine and hundreds of millions of dollars in ill-gotten gains, but they couldn't be bothered with it. That's it. I guess Bridget missed our show. She'll catch it. She's probably out hunting. SR, you have any thoughts?
Like you said, that's it, as if that wasn't enough. I mean, rhyming. I focused on two people today, and that was Gene Wheaton, who was the Marine Corps investigator.
Yeah.
Who went through all of this. He was also the key whistleblower who exposed the elements in the scandal. And the other one was Jose Hueso Rosa, who's the high-ranking Honduran military officer.
Who was working for the CIA to assassinate.
Right.
Yeah.
These two characters, well, first of all, Jose, when you look at him and what he was doing, he's the one who got the prison sentence. And out of that prison sentence, I think what they were really concerned about also is the fact that, gee, we put him in prison. That means nobody else is going to play with us. if you sort of get my drift on that piece, plus what you mentioned earlier.
Right.
And Gene Wheaton just trying to get all of this information out had a heck of a problem going through, even with all the interviews he did and everybody that he talked to. It's unbelievable that all of this didn't come out a lot sooner than later, as it turned out.
They're very good at covering shit up. They're very good at intimidating people, bribing people. It's next to impossible to go to war with them, because if they can't silence you short of death, they will kill you. I mean, these people are trained assassins. So, and it's like the guy. I mean, Koratash was the uh, prosecutor, was obviously corrupt as well. But I can't imagine. I can, not to this degree. I did have a few things that during my career that got revealed to me that you could not in good conscience allow to go on, and I didn't. I i didn't keep secrets, so as you guys can imagine, um two of the most significant ones would have been career ending for me to speak up, and I spoke up anyway. So these are people that work inside our government that, and take just the guy that busted him, it's just a normal drug bust. Worth, $40 million. That's not even a big drug bust. It's a drug bust. And unfortunately, the drug bust is a CIA operation. Now, if you're just a normal guy doing, you know, drug investigations, and the one drug bust that you do, which is like your biggest one, and you're all excited and thinking you're going to get accolades, you did a great job, you ran all the leads, and you got a good guy. I mean, a good bad guy. And you're expecting this to, you're going to get a pat on the back, and your own government works months to basically make sure the guy's protected and gets the sweetheart deal. And you're like, what the fuck? I could have died. These guys carry guns. They're trained assassins. This guy was trained by the CIA to kill a foreign president. And this guy just happens to stumble over the drug bust and makes the drug bust. And his own government is fighting to get the drug trafficker back out on the streets. I can't even imagine the damage. And then you ask yourself, who the hell would work in the DEA? This is, and if for those of you who've never worked in government, let me just tell you that when there is a bad leader, a general officer in the military, everybody knows it. Everybody. So these guys all talk. They go to common seminars, professional development. They have coffee breaks. They will go out and go, you're never going to effing believe what happened to me. I make the biggest drug bust, and the fucking government is actively trying to get the guy off. Do you know what that does to the morale of the entire organization? It destroys it. And these are our government agencies and organizations that the American people put their trust in every day to do the right thing. Go ahead, SR.
I have to agree with you on morale, Colonel. It just blows morale all to hell. But the other thing I'm looking at today, and just maybe sidestepping from the subject here, is we're talking about the indictment of Fulton. And I got a hold of the PDF that had all the charges laid out. He's got 18 charges laid out. And all they're talking about as far as punishment goes is confiscating or getting back any ill-gotten gains he got out of the deal. We're not talking prison time. We're not talking anything. And that's really bugging the stew out of me.
Well, when you're found guilty, it is not up to the prosecutors. They will make a recommendation, but the judge, who I know is a corrupt judge, but there are other things, and I do believe that these initial arrests, indictments, um, they're hoping that these people, as they work their way up the chain, are going to turn state evidence against the higher ups. Um, and, we've been told that the ending isn't going to be for everyone. We are going to be very disappointed in some of what we would view as justice. So I would psychologically prepare yourself for that. Um, you have to believe. I mean, the fact, go back to Iran Contra and look who ultimately was ever held accountable for that. It wasn't the higher ups, it was the middle down people. Um, and I believe the scope of the investigation that's currently going on is not going to exclude the higher ups. And that would be the first time in my lifetime that anybody of any significance, and I think the indictment of Comey illustrates that. Everybody knew for the entire time J. Edgar Hoover was the FBI director that he was a scumbag. Everybody knew Mueller was. To the extent, no, but they still knew he was corrupt. There was a lot of really weird things that happened under the FBI when he was the director. I just posted one yesterday or today about that. But he was never held accountable for that. The fact that they indicted a former FBI director is freaking huge. Bolton, if you go back over his history, has held some very, very high level jobs, to include in the Trump administration. Bolton was the guy that oversaw the initial attempted coup of Maduro. He was intimately involved in that, as you guys are going to find out, because I'm currently working on a book about that. I'm not writing the book. I'm reading the book, just to clarify. And it is one that, because of the timeliness of what's going on, that we will probably do in short order. I still have some checking out and vetting to do of the author in the notes in the book, but it clearly outlines the fact that Bolton was intimately involved in that coup attempt. So it'll be interesting on what he divulges in order to ensure he doesn't go to prison. Anybody else have anything? Okay. Who's over here posting my schedule? Mayor Sarge, of course. So just to reiterate, tomorrow at noon, we're doing our next segment with War Hamster Brady on secret societies. We will do our normal 4 o'clock show. I will not be available for a lot of question and answers tomorrow, because tomorrow and all day Saturday is our annual huge downtown car show here in Lakeland. And I will be attending that with my husband. And that's kind of the schedule for the next day. So, and if you guys did not see the show I did with Keith today at 3 o'clock, I highly recommend you go do that. I will go find the show and repost it when we get off. Um, you guys know that I rarely talk about current events, only because um, I I feel my focus on providing history to people allows them to form their own opinion. So I don't tend to put my opinion or my assessment of current events out there very often. But I had talked to him about a lot of the stuff that was going on. And so much of the stuff that we discover in patterns um, have obviously apply to everything that's going on today. And so, on the rare occasion when I do assess current events based on historical precedent, today was one of those days. So, if you guys missed his 3 p.m. show, I would highly encourage you to go watch it because it was fun for me, only because it requires he did not share with me. He gave me a list of topics, but we got much more in depth, and he threw a few out there. And I really do enjoy that because it makes you think on your feet. And I'd be interested in your feedback on that segment. Um, if you guys are interested, I could do more of those. I just don't tend to do that because I'm so steeped in the historical aspect of it. It takes up so much time. Obviously, I have opinions on everything that's happening, and I that's why I use my post for on X is when people spout off, I just go and tear their arguments apart based on that history that we've all learned together. So, anyway, there's that. So, if we don't have any other comments, I'm going to go ahead and close up shop. And I will see you tomorrow at noon with Warhamster Brady on Secret Societies. Thanks for joining us, everybody. See you guys over here on Rumble. Thanks for being here.